I want to start with a question that may seem strange, but that I want you to take seriously. If the smartest men who ever walked this planet, the guys who literally deciphered the secrets of the universe, who invented the tools that all modern science uses, who saw patterns in reality that the rest of us can't even conceive of, if these men, after everything they studied, after everything they discovered, after delving deeper into the fabric of reality than any other human being, came to the conclusion that God exists, don't you think it's worth at least asking why? I think it's worth it. And I think the answer will surprise you. Because it's not the answer modern culture wants you to hear. Modern culture wants you to believe that faith and intelligence are opposites, that the more you study, the less you believe, that God is a hypothesis for people who don't know enough, a crutch for those who can't handle the naked truth that we are alone in a meaningless universe. But when you look at real history, not the edited version they taught you in school, but real history with names, dates, works, and documented statements, what you find is the opposite. The founders of mathematics and modern science were not atheists. They were believers. Not shy, ashamed believers who hid their faith as if it were a defect. They were staunch believers who saw a deep connection between their work and the existence of God. And John Lennox realized this in a way that changed the entire conversation. Because Lennox is not just a theologian, he is a mathematician from Oxford, of the highest level. And when he looks at the history of mathematics, he sees something that most people have completely missed. He sees an unbroken tradition of geniuses who found God not in spite of mathematics, but through it. Let's get into this story, and let's actually go inside. No superficiality, no cliche. With the depth these men deserve, I want to start with someone who lived before the scientific revolution, someone who planted the seeds of what would come later. Gottfried Wilhelm Leibniz. Leibniz is one of the two inventors of calculus, the other person being Newton, and the two got into a big fight over it. But Leibniz went far beyond calculation. He contributed to logic, philosophy, mechanics, linguistics. He was one of the last great polymaths, a man who knew practically everything there was to know in his time. And the notation we use today in calculus, the integral symbol, the dx, dy, is from Leibniz, not Newton. So every time someone solves an integral in college, they are using the language that Leibniz created. And Leibniz was deeply religious. But what makes him especially interesting for this conversation is not just that he believed in God. It is the argument he built from his mathematical view of the universe. Leibniz posed a question that has become perhaps the most famous philosophical question in history. Why is there something rather than nothing? Think about that question. Nothing would be simpler. It would require no explanation. If nothing existed, there would be nothing to explain. But there is something. There is a universe. There is matter. There are laws. There is complexity. There is life. There is awareness. There's you, listening to this right now. Why? And Leibniz, with the mind of a mathematician who understood fundamentals like few others, argued that the universe does not contain within itself the reason for its existence. Nothing in the universe explains why the universe exists. The laws of physics explain how the universe works, not why it exists. Mathematics describes the behavior of the universe, not the reason for its presence. The explanation needs to come from outside, of something that necessarily exists, of something whose existence does not depend on anything other than itself. And this, said Leibniz, is what we call God. This argument is more than 300 years old, and to this day, no one has convincingly refuted it. They may disagree. They can offer alternative answers. But none of these alternative answers has the logical force of Leibniz's conclusion. And this from one of the greatest mathematicians who ever lived. But let's move on in time. Because Leibniz is just one chapter in this story, there's much more. Let's talk about someone who I think is one of the most fascinating characters in the entire history of science. Someone that many people know by name, but few actually know. Blaise Pascal. Pascal is a unique case in human history because he was brilliant at everything. Mathematics, physics, philosophy, literature. At 16, he wrote a treatise on projective geometry that impressed France's greatest mathematicians. At 19, he invented a mechanical calculator, one of the first computing machines in history. He made fundamental contributions to probability theory, to fluid dynamics, to the understanding of atmospheric pressure. The pressure unit takes the n-ohm his. Pascal's triangle is still used today in combinatorics, and this man, at the height of his scientific career, had an experience that changed everything. On the night of November 23rd, 1654, Pascal had an encounter with God that he described as fire, not metaphorical fire, real fire. An experience so intense that he wrote about it on a piece of parchment, sewed it inside his coat, and carried it for the rest of his life. And from that moment on, Pascal devoted all his intellectual energy to thinking about faith. And what he produced is one of the most beautiful and profound things anyone has ever written. Pascal's Thoughts, an unfinished work that he planned as a rational defense of Christianity. And in there, Pascal makes observations about human nature that are so precise, so cutting, so true that they seem to have been written yesterday. He talks about how we run away from ourselves, about how we fill our lives with noise, distraction, activity, so we don't have to stop and face the void. About how everyone is looking for happiness, but no one really finds it because we are looking in the wrong place. And he comes to a conclusion that I think is one of the truest sentences ever written by a human being. He says that within each person there is an infinite abyss that can only be filled by something infinite, that we try to fill with finite things, pleasure, power, success, relationships, but nothing fits, because the whole is shaped like God. And realize who is saying this. He is not a medieval mystic. He's the guy who invented probability theory. The guy who understood numbers, chances, risks, and calculations better than anyone alive in his time. And this guy looked inside himself with the same precision he used to look at equations and said, I found something here that mathematics can't explain, something that only God fulfills. And Pascal also left another contribution that I think is brilliant. Pascal's famous wager. The logic is simple and devastating. If God exists and you believe, you win everything. If God exists and you don't believe, you lose everything. If God doesn't exist and you believe, you don't miss anything significant. If God doesn't exist and you don't believe, you don't gain anything meaningful. So the rational bet, from the pure point of view of probability theory, is to believe. Now, many people criticize this bet, saying it is simplistic, that you can't force belief. And these criticisms have some merit, but Pascal's point was not to force belief. It was to show that indifference is irrational, that given what's at stake, the possibility of eternal life versus nothing, the least a rational person should do is investigate. And the guy who said that was one of the greatest mathematicians who ever lived. Now let's take a leap. Let's look at the man who, perhaps more than anyone else, should have been an atheist, given the revolution he caused in the way we understand the universe. But it wasn't. Isaac Newton. I've talked about Newton before, but today I want to look at him from a different angle. I want to look at the way he thought about the relationship between mathematics and God. Because for Newton, this relationship was not incidental. It was fundamental. Newton believed that by doing science, he was literally reading God's thoughts. He saw the laws of nature as expressions of divine will, and mathematics was the language that God used to write the universe. When Newton discovered the law of universal gravitation, that elegant equation that describes how every object in the universe attracts every other object, he didn't just see a useful formula, he saw the mind of God at work in creation, and Newton had a specific argument that I think is powerful. He looked at the solar system, the planets orbiting the sun with mathematical precision, each on its own trajectory without colliding, without going off course, and said that this system could not have arisen by chance. The elegance and stability of the solar system demanded an explanation that went beyond blind matter. They demanded a mind. And the most interesting thing is that Newton did not believe in a God of the gaps, the God that we use to explain what science has not yet explained. No. Newton used God to explain what science had already explained. He said, the fact that the universe follows laws is itself evidence of a lawgiver. It is not the absence of explanation that points to God, it is the presence of order. And this is a crucial point that Lennox makes a point of repeating. Because modern atheism likes to accuse believers of using the God of the gaps. But the greatest believing scientists in history didn't do that. They didn't say, I don't know how to explain it, so God. They said, I know how to explain, and the explanation is so beautiful, so elegant, so mathematically precise, that it points to a mind behind everything. And now we go to another era. Let's go to the 19th century. And let's talk about a man whose story is both tragic and inspiring. Georg Cantor. Cantor did something that no one before him had managed to do. He tamed infinity, or at least tried. He created set theory and mathematically proved something that seems impossible. There are different sizes of infinity. Not just an infinity, infinite infinities, each one bigger than the other. I'll try to explain it in a way that makes sense. The natural numbers, 1, 2, 3, 4, and so on, are infinite. They never end. But Cantor proved that real numbers, which include all fractions, all decimals, all irrational numbers, are more infinite than natural numbers. There is an infinity greater than the infinity of natural numbers. And then there's another, even greater infinity, and another, an infinite hierarchy of infinities, each one greater than the last. When Cantor published this, the reaction from the mathematical world was brutal. Leopold Kronecker, one of the most influential mathematicians of the time, called Cantor a charlatan. He said he was corrupting the youth, it blocked his career, and Cantor suffered from it. He had severe depression. He was hospitalized several times. He died in a sanatorium. But his work survived, and today it is recognized as one of the most important contributions in the entire history of mathematics. The great mathematician David Hilbert said that no one will ever expel us from the paradise that Cantor created. And what almost no one tells you is that Cantor's motivation was deeply theological. He believed that the different levels of infinity he discovered were reflections of God's infinite nature. He saw the mathematics of infinity as a way to glimpse the greatness of the Creator. And he made a fascinating distinction between what he called the transfinite infinity, the mathematical infinities that he studied, and the absolute infinity, which was God. The mathematical infinities were like shadows of the real infinity. And when critics attacked his work, saying that infinity should not be studied because it was God's domain, Cantor responded that, on the contrary, God had put infinity in mathematics precisely so that it could be studied, so that the human mind could, through numbers, glimpse something of divine greatness. I find this extraordinary. A man persecuted by the academic community, suffering from depression, admitted to sanatoriums, maintained the conviction that his work was sacred, that the infinities he discovered were windows into the mind of God. And history proved him right, at least about the math. Cantor's work is today the basis of all modern mathematics. And now we go to the 20th century. Let's talk about Kurt Gödel. And if you think the others were impressive, wait. Gödel is considered by many to be the greatest logician since Aristotle. Some say he is the greatest logician of all time. In 1931, at just 25 years old, he published 2 theorems that shook mathematics to its foundations. Gödel's incompleteness theorems. What these theorems say, in simplified form, is this. In any sufficiently powerful mathematical system, there are truths that cannot be proven within the system itself. Mathematics cannot prove everything about itself. There are fundamental, insurmountable limits to what formal reason can achieve. That was an earthquake. Because at the time, many mathematicians believed that mathematics was complete, that given enough time, everything could be proven. Gödel showed that this was not the case, that the truth is greater than the proof, that there are true things that no formal system will ever be able to demonstrate. And Lennox uses this in a way that I think is brilliant. He says, if even mathematics, the most rigorous system of thought that humanity has ever invented, has limits, if even mathematics points to truths that are beyond itself, then why is it so difficult to accept that reality points to something beyond itself? If mathematics needs something outside of itself to be complete, why wouldn't the universe need something outside of it to make sense? And Gödel personally believed in God. He developed a formal version of the ontological proof of God's existence using modal logic. This proof is still debated today by philosophers and logicians, but the fact that the greatest logician of the 20th century considered the existence of God something worthy of mathematical formalization speaks volumes. Gödel also believed in life after death. And when they asked why, he gave an answer that is typically Gödelian. He said that the world is rational, that it has meaning, and that existence without continuation would have no meaning. Therefore, the rationality of the universe suggests that death is not the end. Now, I want to stop and ask you a question, because we've already been through Leibniz, Pascal, Newton, Cantor, and Gödel, 5 of the greatest mathematical geniuses in history. 5 minds that saw reality with a depth that most of us cannot imagine. And all 5 believed in God, and are superficial. In a deep, thoughtful, reasoned way, doesn't that tell you anything? Modern atheism wants you to believe that faith in God is for those who haven't studied enough. But these 5 people have studied more than almost any human being who has ever lived. They delved deeper into the fabric of reality than any famous atheist on YouTube. And they came out the other side believing in God. And it's not just these 5. The list is huge. James Clerk Maxwell, who unified electricity and magnetism, devout Christian. Michael Faraday, one of the greatest experimentalists in history, preacher in a Protestant church. Bernhard Riemann, whose geometry is the basis of general relativity, son of a pastor, Christian to the end. Arthur Eddington, the astrophysicist, who confirmed Einstein's relativity, practicing Quaker. And so many others. And the list doesn't end. And Lennox makes a point that I think is decisive. He says, these people did not believe in God despite their intelligence. They believed because of their intelligence. Mathematics did not keep them from God. Mathematics brought them closer together, because the more they understood the structure of the universe, the more they saw the fingerprints of a creative mind. And what exactly did they see? What does mathematics show that points to God? It shows that the universe is governed by laws, not because of chaos, elegant, beautiful laws that can be expressed in equations. And laws don't write themselves. Laws require a lawgiver. It shows that the human mind is capable of discovering these laws. that there is a mysterious correspondence between our ability to think and the structure of the cosmos. And this correspondence makes no sense if both mind and cosmos are accidents. It makes sense if they both come from the same source. It shows that the universe is calibrated with absurd precision to allow life, physical constants adjusted into unimaginably small fractions, parameters that, if they were slightly different, would make existence impossible. And this seems like a project, not chance. It shows that there are truths that transcend any system, as Gödel proved, which suggests that reality is greater than any finite description of it, that there is something beyond, and it shows that mathematics is beautiful, not just functional, beautiful, elegant, symmetrical. And beauty is something that materialism cannot explain. Natural selection doesn't care about beauty. Evolution does not reward elegance, and yet the universe is dazzlingly beautiful in its mathematical structure. And the human mind is able to perceive and marvel at this beauty, to feel something when you contemplate a perfect equation that is similar to what you feel when you listen to a symphony or see a sunset. All of this together forms a picture that the greatest mathematicians in history have recognized. The universe has a signature, and the signature is from someone who thinks, what plans, who creates with purpose and beauty. And now I want to speak directly to you. Because I know maybe you're not a mathematician. Maybe numbers aren't your thing. Maybe equations give you a headache. All good. You don't need to understand calculus to understand what these men saw, because what they saw in mathematics, you can see in your life. You can find the order they found in the equations in your child's smile, the beauty they saw in theorems you see in a sunset. The truth that they discovered in the numbers, you feel it when someone hugs you, and you know without a shadow of a doubt that it is real, that love is real, which is not chemistry, it's not an illusion, it's not a trick of the brain, and that emptiness that Pascal described, that infinite abyss within each person, I know you do, because everyone knows it. It's that feeling that something is missing, that no matter how much you achieve, no matter how much you accumulate, no matter how much you run, there is something that cannot be fulfilled. And what Pascal would tell you, what he would tell you looking into your eyes with all the intensity of a genius who has experienced fire, is that this emptiness is not a defect. It's design. It's your heart recognizing that it was made for something infinite, and finite things don't fit in infinite spaces. The greatest mathematicians in history knew the truth, not because they were naive, not because they were ignorant, not because they lived in times when everyone believed and had no choice, but because they looked deeper into the universe than any of us, and saw something deep down that couldn't be ignored. They saw order where chance would produce chaos. They saw beauty where randomness would produce noise. They saw meaning where materialism says there is none. And they had the honesty to say what they saw, even when it was unpopular, even when it was expensive, even when the world told them they were wrong. And the question that remains is the same question that always remains. The same question that Newton, Euler, Pascal, Cantor, and Gödel answered, each in their own time, each in their own way. What are you going to do with what you saw? Why now you know. You know that the greatest minds in history saw no contradiction between mathematics and faith. You know that science was not born against God, but from God. You know that the intelligibility of the universe, the beauty of the equations, the human capacity to understand the cosmos, all of this points in a direction that materialism cannot explain. Now it's up to you. You can do what the culture tells you and ignore all of this. You can shrug your shoulders and move on. Or you can do what these geniuses did. You can have the courage to follow the evidence wherever it leads. Even if destiny surprises you, even if it takes you to a place you didn't expect. Because they knew the truth, and the truth is there, waiting, for anyone who has the courage to look. If this made sense, leave a like. If it made you think of something you had never thought of, comment below. If someone comes to mind, share, subscribe to the channel, and see you in the next one.